Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr. Another long pause for Christine. And you're listening to Fiber Talk, the twice weekly podcast for people who play with needles. And our guest this week is Arlene Cohen. Hi, Arlene.
Hi, Gary.
Good to have you with us.
I'm glad. It's very good to be here.
Yes. So by way of explanation, I know I keep threatening that Christine's going to be better. But we're recording this an hour before we started to record this. I got a text from Christine that things had really taken a turn for the worse, and I'm surprised because the Wednesday we recorded before this, a couple days ago, she was feeling pretty good. So whatever she has is not going well, but I'm confident that by the time this airs in 2 weeks, that she'll be back on her feet and just fine. But nonetheless, pray for Christine because she's hurting. So. Yeah, so she can't join us, and we had this all set up, so she said, just go ahead. So we're going ahead.
Right.
So Arlene, let's see. Arlene, I first encountered you on Needlepoint Nation.
Yes.
Because you were doing the weekly, you were stitching that piece on gauze.
Yes.
And so that was the first I saw the name Arlene Cohen, and I was just enthralled with that thing and anxious for each weekly update of that, and that was a long project, wasn't it?
It was, and it remains the longest. The project that I don't know how to phrase this correctly. The project that I've worked on the longest, like it took me the longest amount of time that I have ever done. I am mostly a one project at a time kind of person, which is very different than a lot of stitchers that I've encountered. And that project I spent over a year working on, and I did give myself permission to have a little break. There were a couple of chunks of a couple weeks here and a few weeks there. There were sort of 2 chunks that was basically working on gift things. But I was working on that for over a year and sort of did some rough calculation of hours and time, and it absolutely was longer than any other project I'd ever done. And what was different about it for me, because I was posting on the Needlepoint Nation Facebook group, my progress. And I basically posted every 2 weeks because it didn't seem like enough progress to post every week. And it was my first moment of realization, the support of me feeling support of community within a needlework group. I have read lots of blogs and followed a lot of blogs over the years, and some people who will, follow a project from, one post to another or multiple things. And yeah, I'm sort of feeling like I'm getting to know them and so on. But I never started a blog for myself because I just never felt like I had enough to say, even though there was this interest of, well, it'd be nice to kind of start getting that kind of feedback. And then over the years, I think people haven't done blogs as much, and there's certainly, even the ones who continue to do blogs, there aren't as many comments and so on left because there's been so many other outlets for sharing. But because I had started doing that, there was just this wonderful response. And then it became, when I would post, people were saying, oh, so glad to see it, been waiting to see it. And that just made such a difference to me. It was so, it was so supportive and wonderful. And I felt like people were cheering me on to get that piece done. And that makes a difference. It really does.
No, I had a sense through the many weeks that I watched it that the cheering was motivating for you, because that was a tedious piece. And,
yes.
One where most people would have gotten about halfway and put it aside and maybe come back to it 5 years from now. But I had a sense that it was really motivating you.
Yes, absolutely. It was, and it's something I haven't yet featured. I need to get it in one of my Flosstube videos. It's 40 count silk gauze. It's 10.5 inches by 10.5 inches. Do the math. That's a lot of stitches. And it was tedious is a great word for it. And at the same time, when I started that project, I did something that I very rarely, I don't know if I'd ever done this before, which was to sort of give myself permission that, if I don't like this, I'm going to stop it. And I guess it's because previous projects that I've started beforehand, I've just always 100% jumped in knowing I'm going to love this. And I sort of knew this was going to be a long haul thing. But once I got going, I was like, I do love this. The tediousness, some of the background got tedious, so, there's certain parts, but, it was something that I loved, and hey, I got to connect with you because of it, which was great.
Yeah, and people may be wondering, who is this Arlene Cohen, and why are we talking to her? And it really is that. I mean, we kind of connected through that, and you do such a wide variety of needlework things, including bobbin lacing, which just amazes me. There's going to be a day when I'm going to give it a try. But we've just kind of connected, and I mean, you do so much, and you're one of the two Flosstube videos that I watch immediately when it comes out, because of the information you provide and the way you present it. I really enjoy doing that. It's so informative, and basically we're talking to you because I want to, so take that.
Oh. But so kind. Yes.
But so you do. Geez, is there any stitching you haven't done? I mean, what got you started way back when you were a kid? How do you get started doing this?
So I was trying to think. So a little bit of this I had said. I shared a bit of a pretty important stitching story in my very first Flosstube video. I know as a kid, my mom we would do like little crafty projects in the summertime. And I feel like there might have been a little, the equivalent of a Michael's or, craft store like that kind of project every once in a while, but it was not anything that ever stuck. And I don't know, I can't tell you what it was about the idea of stitching that really connected with me. My mom did, in terms of relatives or connections that you hear a lot of stitchers have. My mom, I didn't grow up with grandparents or aunts or anything. It just wasn't there. My mom crocheted. That was just sort of around. But there wasn't anything that really I grew up with. Again, little crafty projects, little things, but I was known, there's no doubt about this, in my family as someone who would try something and then kind of give up on it. And then the absolute true story, and again, I shared this in the first video, so anyone who's listening could go back and watch my first Flosstube video. When I was a teenager, I got in the mail, and it's one of these mysteries to this day, and I'll give a little shout out to karma, to the gods that be out there for how this, got me on a trail somehow. I got in the mail a sample issue of an old magazine, which I believe is Cross Stitch and Country Crafts. One of those old ones doesn't exist anymore. And the bizarre thing is how it came addressed to why it came addressed to me, like how my name even got on a mailing list, like how that happened at the time, I had no idea, but there was something about that intrigued me. And on the cover of that magazine, or maybe, no, it wasn't on the cover. In that magazine was a cross stitch of a little girl having a tea party with her dolls. And it was so detailed. It was not the little cheesy little craft, kits I had seen in the past. And I was just amazed. I never thought of myself of having any artistic skill. I have an older sister who would draw, and she had the drawing skills, and I couldn't draw. I couldn't do that stuff. But I remember having this magazine probably for 6 months, maybe even a year, and just always looking at it and thinking, I think I want to do that. I think I want to try doing that. And finally, I just decided I really want to do that. And it was before I was driving, because part of this story is about getting my mom to take me it was probably some trip we were going to a store that was, the precursor to before there was a Michael's in town that sold DMC floss. I guess I in some way I must have been familiar with the idea of DMC floss and the numbers, that this whole list of numbers in the magazine, and the idea of buying some fabric and that the numbers and the graph would match up. Like I knew, I can't tell you how, but I kind of knew that kind of basic thing. And so I'm sitting there in the store pulling all those, and I think there must have been 60, 70 different colors in this thing. And I'm pulling all this floss, and my mom sees me doing this, and she has that look on her face. And I knew what that look was about. And the first thing I said to her, don't worry, I'm buying this myself. I'm using my babysitting money, because that look was going to be about, I'm not buying that stuff for you because you are never going to finish it. I mean, that's what she said. I don't know why you're going to spend your babysitting money on that. You are never going to finish it. Well, you know what happens when you get like that. But it was sort of, I started with the face, and there was something about starting with a blank fabric and bringing a face to life with, whatever, a dozen different, flesh colored tones or whatever it was, that was all of a sudden something that I thought, this is just amazing. And again, I had the sister who drew, and she was the artist in the family, and I wasn't claiming that what I was doing was art. I was following a pattern, but it was so appealing to me. And that's how I got started. And that cross stitch, which I still have, and it hangs on my wall to this day, is just so important to me. I have that and two others that are very similar in that I call them my three babies. They are three. One of them is a baby. There's another young child of, just close up, very detailed, lots of colors to get, when you look at it at a distance, you might think it's a print or something like that. And, that was my way of getting into cross stitch. And I feel like no one in my family ever gets it or understands it. That's okay. We all do our own things. But that's how I got started.
Yeah. See, when I first encountered cross stitch, because I learned needlepoint, wool on, 12 or 13 point, your mesh canvas, basket weave, blah, blah, blah. But when I first encountered cross stitch was when cross stitch stores were everywhere, and I think I still have half of the stack of cross stitch and country crafts magazines, because that was just a great magazine, because they really did have good patterns. I mean, they had some of the more cheesier ones, but they really had good charts in them with quality stuff. And that's where I learned. And actually, it was at that same store. The first class I ever took in needlework was doing a sampler on linen. That was my first class, was do a sampler on linen. And actually, that is still framed, and I still have that. That was my first, other than crude needlepoint things, that was my first real, the one that I felt was really worth investing in and keeping, and still have that. And it's interesting what those first patterns are. But that cross stitch and country crafts, that ran a long time too. That was really a good magazine, I felt. Yeah.
Now, is your sampler all cross stitch, or does it involve specialty stitches?
No, it's specialty stitches. There's all kinds of stuff in it. It was out over your skis. Somebody said stitched linen looked hard, very high thread count on the ground cloth. So then, okay, give me that. Let me try that. And of course, the only male in the class. But I finished it shortly after the class ended. I mean, it was like a 2 or 3 week class, and I finished that thing. So it was, and still I look back, that's the fun thing for me, is to look back, how bad was I? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And I still will hold that up. That's pretty good. And I did one for my sister that I completely forgot I did. It was a wedding, crewel. I think it was crewel that I did for my sister, I don't know how many years ago, ages ago. Completely forgot that I did it. And one time when I was there, she brought it out. And I thought, oh no, I don't want to see this, because I didn't. And she says, do you remember this? I said, no, I don't remember it at all. And she, and then it's, oh, I don't want to see this mess. What did I do with this thing? And actually, I looked it over pretty tight, or pretty close. Not too bad, not too bad. So, do you look at your three babies and say, oh, geez, it could have been a little better, or did you do a pretty good job as a young girl?
There's a couple things that I've known for a long time about them, like, and I pointed this out in the video where I showed it. I learned the importance in those patterns, or in the magazine, when it had a little 2 next to a number, that meant you needed to buy 2 skeins, because you would run out. Because there was one particular color that was used a lot in like the background, and I did run out. I was like, okay, I'll go get another one. And that was my little evidence that, DMC does have some color dye lot changes. And to my eyes, you can absolutely see that in one of those pieces. And, it's something that, that was an early lesson. I mean, it's not dramatic, but it was an early lesson. And it's something I think about to this day, that when I'm purchasing thread, even if it's DMC, I try to kind of plan ahead, or if not, I am aware of the variety of ways you kind of stagger and work it out, so that if you are using a skein bought at a different time, you're trying to like not make it obvious, just in case there is a difference in color.
Right.
So yeah, and I suppose if I look up close at the stitches, you could see there's some twisting of threads and some of the things that nowadays I just sort of just doesn't get by me, but right. I wasn't even thinking of or looking at back then. So,
At that age, that had to look like a monumental project, all on its own.
Oh, sure. I mean, it was about the number of colors. That alone was just that you could do something with that many colors. I mean, that was my stitching thing, was about how many colors it had. I mean, now there's so many other levels you can take on in terms of size, in terms of complexity and all of that. But, and following the pattern was just, I've learned so much, even in these last, let's say 6 months, but the concept of like using a highlighter to more or less cross off what you've already done. I've never done that. It's never occurred to me to do that. And I can't tell you why. It's just like, I don't know. I think some of it is like, I've always used the library and I've just never like written in books because of that. And so there's something about like, I can't write in a pattern even though it's mine, and I could do whatever I want with it. But yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the biggest reasons with charts like that I make a copy. So if I do mark on them or something happens to them, the original is pristine, because that's the way I was raised. Is if you have a book, you take care of it, you don't write in it, you don't do anything, and you be careful with the binding and all those things. I know what you mean. Yeah, just that mentality that just won't go away. It's just ingrained in you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're a math teacher. And every time I hear you talk about your stitching, it comes out that there's this math tie-in. I sense it every time that I hear you talk, either in person or through your Flosstube, that math plays a role. That's your hook, at least in my view. That's your hook, is the math part of it, the graphs, the charts, the numbers. Is that do you sense that, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it took me a long time to realize that, but I think I could say that those early cross stitch babies are sort of, I'm almost going to say the only, and that might be too extreme, but really among the fewest pictorial things that I've done. It's a lot more geometric stuff that has appealed to me in the needlework world, and that geometric side is absolutely from the mathematical side of me. And I always feel like I have to explain the mathematical side in that I'm not a high levels of math go way over my head. I'm not like a college professor level of math. That kind of stuff is above me. But because I teach at middle school level, the geometric things that can come up on two-dimensional things that I love, that I can create with my hands, that absolutely comes. And actually, that is also where bobbin lace came in, that I think the appeal, especially the initial learning of bobbin lace, the initial style that most people learn, including myself, called torchon, has a very geometric bent to it, that you have to kind of think about this pinhole and that pinhole and threads going mostly 45-degree angles and so on. And I think that's one of the reasons I got hooked on it, was because that side connected with me. It certainly isn't all mathematical, not by any means. But there is that logical side that there's always that appeal. And the designing piece of cross stitch, you'd ask me in these questions, what's the first piece I designed? And I was trying to, you can interpret that question two different ways, because, we'll get to talking about my Etsy store in a minute, but I was trying to really think, what is the first thing that I actually ever designed? And truthfully, so I have these 3 cross stitch, I'll call them my babies. And then it was when I was in college, and it's more or less my 4th cross stitch project, that I wanted to, I had all these quotes that I just was really into collecting quotes. And I thought, I'm getting into this cross stitch thing, and I want to display these quotes, and I'm going to stitch the quotes, and the connection with graph paper, that you could graph this out, and you could get a chart that has alphabets and a chart that has borders. And I charted out alphabets and borders and charted out my quotes. And I mean, that's the mathematical side. I want to center it. I want it to look nice, So I realized that the essence of using graph paper for designing work even goes way, way back. I mean, that's just that. And again, I think if there wasn't that mathematical side of me, I don't know where that designing piece would go. 'Cause it's so appealing to me.
Yeah, I picked up on that the morning that we sat out there in front of the restaurant, and you showed me bobbin lacing. I could see that math mind working, and that you were really one with the threads and all the little angles and the pins, and that was a small piece, and it looked like just a blur to me. But I could tell that math mind was just in sync with what was going on there. But then as you've talked about your other designs, the designs you're selling at WorksByABC on Etsy, as you talk about those other designs and what's behind them, the inspiration, the background, whether you take them from old art pieces or whatever it might be, that math is always there. I think it's just great, because in this business, most of the people are artists. They just see the art. And you and Diane Herman is the other one that sticks out in my mind. She's a math professor at University of Chicago, I think. Are two that math is always an integral part of it. And I just think it's neat, because for you, as teaching math all day, you'd think you'd run away from it at night, but you can't help it.
So a little off topic, but totally connected. Have you ever heard of Bridges, which is an art and math conference?
No.
It's probably not in your world. So, in all the ways that there are things that happen in your life that affect you, and you don't even realize it till it happens. Some years ago, I heard about this academic conference. I mean, who it attracts is academics, and it's called Bridges, and it's math and art. And it's located around the world every year. It's in a different location, and it's very international, and that's partially because of the people who founded it. But when I first learned about it, I was able to apply for a grant, and this was in 2009 was the first time I went, and it was in Canada, so it wasn't exotic travel international, and it was in Banff, which is, I don't know if I had never been. It was gorgeous, beautiful on the western area in Canada, outside of Calgary, or pretty far out of Calgary. And so it was inspiring to be in that beautiful atmosphere. And so it was this academic group, like people presenting these mathematical, like paper presentations, but it was all connecting math and art. And it was the first time, me, like, this middle school math teacher just showing up, like not really following the very mathy presentations, so loving the artistic presentations. Taking away what I did take away from that was just more on a personal professional development than a school level professional development. But it was so wonderful to have this interaction with those two worlds, with math and art. And actually what I did take away from it is I'd gone back to my school at the time and painted a math mural. There was this odd space in this odd location that just wasn't taken care of, and I just jokingly said, a mural needs to be painted, and one of my math colleagues said, well, you should do it, and I said, I think I will. And so I went to that conference with this vague idea of, well, if I find some particularly inspirational things, I'll, make a star in my notebook or whatever. And then I did. I went back and painted a mural on the wall. It was my math mural on that wall. And I think about those kind of experiences in my life where I've had, so because of that, and I went to that conference a second time when it was in the United States. It wasn't the University of Maryland, but it was in Maryland somewhere. I don't remember the name of the school it was at. And the same idea, just again, being surrounded by a lot of academics, a lot of people where this was their professional kind of thinking. And I was just coming at it from a different place. That said, at that second time, there was someone there presenting an academic paper on bobbin lace. And
no, really?
I'm not making this up. And I've had a few interactions with her, not recently, but afterwards, because what was I doing in the audience? I had a notebook balanced on, the armrest or anything. And then I was tatting while, because that's what and it was okay. It was the kind of atmosphere where I felt okay doing that. It was to do something like tatting was just, it truly keeps myself focused during like a presentation. And and I saw in the list of presentations, there would be someone presenting on bobbin lace. I was so fascinated about that. And she actually started her presentation by saying, I know there's somebody in the audience tatting right now, and we need to meet up after this. She, because you could take bobbin lace, and what her presentation was about is you could study all these old laces and you could see the paths that threads typically go. And her question she was exploring the idea of, okay, there are so many permutations of how threads could go, and why were only, a dozen of them used when there's actually, 126 or whatever the number was. And so it got a little too technical and a little beyond where my lace interests go, but I loved that there was an academic out there that was using bobbin lace, and she had written a computer program and was sort of showing the different ways that this could all go. And it was just another way that I got to experience math and art in that connecting way. And so that has always been a place that I've looked for in my world, whether it's through, seeing articles or journals or whatever that come through my school life online, or just in my own interest when I go to a museum, and just that connection between math and art, because there's so much out there. And whether it's like an Escher, MC Escher was just known for using so much math, or a lot of others that were not so known for it. It's just a piece that I realize more and more how much I've been drawn to it. And then at its essence, when you take patterns, like whether it be cross stitch or, basically any pattern that we do in our work, I guess with the exception of like surface embroidery stuff, but you're working with graph paper. You're working with something that is so elementally, on an elemental level, mathematical. So of course there's a connection there.
Right, and I think many people don't realize.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they just design and they don't realize how much math they're using to get there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's fun. That's fun. So, I mean, you have at least dabbled in, but do all kinds of stitching in addition to lace. And your designs these days, I've been kind of surprised that your designs have virtually all been cross stitch. Is cross stitch still the one that leads the pack for you, or is there another type of needlework, or is it the lace that is really what drives you?
So there's a whole bunch of questions in what you just said there.
Thanks. It's what I do. Yes.
So there's so many different levels going on there. When I started, so I sort of need to unpack that by going back to Flosstube. And I really need to thank you and Christine for this. I really do, because when you guys started doing these fiber talks, I mean, you must have posted in all kinds of variety places, including some of the Facebook groups that I was on, and I was immediately intrigued with podcasts about stitching. Yeah, of course I'm going to listen to that. And I don't know if Vanna was your second guest. Whoever your first guest was definitely someone I knew, and I think Vanna was your second guest.
Yeah, Debbie Rowley was the first one, yes.
And I've done some Debbie Rowley things, and then Vanna was the second, and she talked about Flosstube. And I knew that I'd heard of Flosstube through reading Connie, the Spinster Stitcher's blog. A few times, maybe a year ago or so, she had mentioned watching this thing called Flosstube. And I know you've done this before, but I just, the teacher side of me is coming out, and I just want to say this again for those who've never watched. Flosstube is going on YouTube. It is going on YouTube and searching for videos that people have posted that are specifically related to stitching. And they have basically just put a name to them that are called Flosstube. So you're just searching, when I started this, I didn't know if I had to sign up or anything. No. by just putting the name Flosstube in the title of my video, that's how it gets found. So anyone who is doing a stitching video just calls it Flosstube, and that's what you're searching for. So I remember Connie, in a blog post mentioning this thing called Flosstube, and I was intrigued. I do a lot of, well, it's changed a little bit, but a lot of my, particularly my lace time, but also stitching time, was listening to audiobooks a lot. Not so much, I didn't really want the visual stuff. The audio was more interesting. But anyway, I remember trying to find Flosstube that intrigued me, and I just had some not so good luck. I clicked on a few Flosstube, and I couldn't tell you who I found. I found some people showing some projects, and I just thought, all right, I'm not that interested in seeing someone show a few of their projects. And some of that is because I didn't know them. I didn't know their projects. There just wasn't any kind of connection at all. And so, there was no thought to that. So then fast forward to, what was that, February or January, when you were,
January, yeah.
Interviewing Vanna, and I'm listening to that, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I got to go watch Vanna's Flosstube. And man, was that such a different experience to me. This was like someone who was having a conversation with me. I mean, obviously we weren't having a conversation, but it was someone who was sharing in a way that I felt like we were connecting. And so over the course of time, I watched all of Vanna's videos, and then it took a while for me to find, and some of it was just waiting for, what YouTube will do is just randomly select other things you might want to watch. And I think if you're searching Flosstube, it will show you more Flosstubes, but then you'll randomly get something else in there, and you just sort of say, skip this one, show me the next one. And it took me a while. And then what I discovered is Vanna, as well as other people, would do shout outs of other Flosstubers that she watched. And I thought, well, if Vanna likes that person, I better go check that person out. And it started to evolve over a relatively short period of time of, my God, there's this great community out there. Because I'm just watching this Flosstuber, and now she's mentioning that one, and now I'm going to go watch that one, and man, they're friends. But wait a second, they haven't met. They're just friends. And wait, now they're talking about a stitch along with this one, and so on. And so what I just discovered was something that I really wanted to be a part of. What was hard about that is that most of what I was seeing was cross stitch, and cross stitch had not really been my main stitching focus for some years. And I say that in that I really have done, as you have noticed, lots of different stitching projects. I've always had, for years now, I would say I have one stitching project and one lace project going on at all times. And with both of those usually being relatively long-term things. I never really did small things unless I was like working on a gift or something, very specific. And so, I pondered this idea about, well, is Flosstube only for cross stitchers? I could show some cross stitch that I've done, but that's going to run out pretty quickly. So I mean, there was that piece of it. But one day I just decided, I'm going to be brave about this. I'm going to jump in, and on my first video I show mostly cross stitch, but I also did show that I also do other things, and I so appreciated the positive response, and that I say that through the comments. I mean, that, and so many Flosstubers will say this as well, that interaction with the comments, and some of that has extended to, I'll use the word, friendships, that have gone beyond the comments, that really encouraged me, because there were people that were interested in seeing what I was doing. I mean, obviously, lots of people like to see lots of cross stitch, and I share what I have. So now you asked about like the designing of the cross stitch. There's a practical side here and an enjoyment practical side, and then where am I going with all of this? So, the designing piece with the cross stitch really started on a very practical level with what kind of computer program I have. It's meant for cross stitch designing. The whole idea of a graph paper and click on blocks. I currently have in my store, and I'll get more to this, but I've loved my beginning steps, my beginning forays into doing canvas work designing, and I really want to continue that. I need to solve some technical questions there. I need to work on finding a better way to do the graphing piece of it than I currently am doing. I mean, I don't know a better way to say it. And so I love what I'm creating in terms of the cross stitch designing, and also because I became involved in this community, and it was only after I became involved. And so I'm going to lead into talking about Works by ABC here. So I'm watching Flosstube. I started filming making my own videos, getting so much positive response, starting to interact. And then one day I saw somebody who, I started to hear people talk about, they were selling needle minders, they were selling grime guards. Some of these people sell different things, and some of them through Etsy and some of them through other vehicles. And what a great way this was to talk about, or to, share that, hey, if you're interested in what I sell, here's how you could get it. One day I saw someone who was showing something that they were stitching, and they said in a very casual way that they created it using a software program. They said, I don't know if anyone else is interested, but I decided to open an Etsy store and put it up, and you could go get it if you want. And I was just kind of floored by how casual that was. But I went to go check it out. It wasn't a pattern that I would purchase, but I was very intrigued by that idea, because I've designed some of my own pieces, and some of them that have meant a great deal to me. And I just wondered, would anyone be interested in anything I've created? And starting with cross stitch, because in some ways I find cross stitch the easiest to design, the easiest to take what I love, this connection of history and a story, like take a good story and make it come to life with something you're creating by hand. And to me, I mean, I suppose it's the way a painter works with their paints, and they could take a blank canvas and make it work. Cross stitch was the easiest way to bring that out. And also, frankly, it's the source of my community right now is a lot of cross stitchers. That said, the canvas work that I started, I have one black work design, and I'm determined to do more with that also. But again, the program that I have, I'm still learning how to best do it, to use it in the best possible ways, and if necessary, acquire other ways to graph out other things to design. So cross stitch is the way to start. Cross stitch is certainly the way that has gotten me, which I'm so grateful for, people who are interested in what I'm doing. Some people have said, well, how's it going? And I don't know what to compare myself against. I've had this Etsy store open. So let me just, my Etsy store is called WorksByABC. My initials are ABC. That is not made up. People joke as a teacher that your initials are ABC. Yes, they are. And that's how I came to name my store that. And to me, it's very fortuitous to call it Works by ABC, in that it keeps open the possibility of what those works could be. It's not cross-stitch designs. It could be anything. So I will see where it goes. For right now, I love all the possibilities that cross-stitch can offer. And I have been doing more cross-stitch in the last few months because of that. But I still want to try to keep expanding from there. And again, some of that is just, it's still working through it's still working through the technical side of it. And also, I'm also still trying to explore, like, I'm just figuring this out as I go. I'm trying to figure out how do you get people interested in your work? You go on Etsy, let alone something, like the Google, but you go on Etsy and you put in cross-stitch patterns, you get something like 30,000 responses. Now, granted, a whole bunch of them really aren't cross-stitch patterns, but let's say you actually finagle that down, and there's probably easily 10,000 of those that are cross-stitch patterns. So I don't think there's too many people that go to Etsy and just look for cross-stitch patterns. They're going for something specific. Either they're going to a specific store, or they're looking for something because they want a specific design. They want a Christmas design, or they want a Halloween design, or whatever, and they can narrow their interests in their searches like that. But I'm trying to figure out what are the other vehicles to get the word out about myself.
Well, that's the thing. You're asking the same question Christine and I ask all the time about this podcast. Is how do you get the word out? How do you build an audience? And there are so many ways for people to find you, and to cover them all is almost a full-time job in itself. And then exactly that. What are they looking for? And you go to Etsy, you go to Pinterest, you go anywhere and put in cross stitch, and you're just buried in the stuff. And so how do you stand out? Yeah, I wish I had an answer for that. Because our whole concept with Fiber Talk is something you can listen to while you're stitching, because I have many examples of tearing out thread because I was watching TV and not paying attention, and it's the same concept as audiobooks. But then obviously people like to sit and watch on their machines or their tablets or whatever, watch what other people are doing through Flosstube, but there's a ton of it. And how do you stick out? How do you get noticed? And it's tough to do. I'm not sure there's an easy answer for that.
And there's so many designers out there on all levels, and
right,
and I wish to find a little bit more of a network of, how do you get started in all of this? How do you expand and so on? And I think it's just, I don't know, figuring, a couple of lucky breaks and figuring it out as you go. And I don't know. I feel very fortunate when some floss tubers have featured because they're stitching on something of mine, and then I see some sales of that pattern, and I can reach out to that person and say thank you, because I know where it's coming from. That's the difference. Yeah.
Well, and that's just it. When you look at the width and breadth of needlework, most people don't even begin to realize the number of options there are for different types of needlework, not just different threads, but different types of needlework, different techniques that if you live in a cross-stitch world or live in a needlepoint world, that there are so many other options for working with thread and needle that all share techniques, but then have their own unique aspects. And that's, that can be a problem too. I know it is for me. It's like, I want to try this and I want to try that and I want to try this over here. And at some point you do have to settle down and say, look, I'm going to focus on these two techniques, if nothing else. And, but then, I'll see one of Yvette Stanton's books and, oh wait, I want to do that stuff. I want to do that. And Trish Burr with her needle painting, I want to try that. There's just so many, and everybody's got a niche. Everybody, and when you really get involved in it, there are so many people all over the world that are very skilled and very experienced and teach a lot in all these techniques. And the internet and our connectivity through all kinds of channels has opened all those doors that for years were closed. I mean, cross stitch for a lot of people was what the local store offered and what their friends were stitching, and now it has nothing to do with that. It's, it could be somebody from Australia for all you know, and it doesn't really matter because, I think that's fun, but in terms of an Etsy store or a podcast, how do you stand out? That's what makes it tough.
Yes. Well, and I so appreciate those who commented and I've interacted with who've said to me that because of something that I've shared on my videos, I've never seen that before. I've never heard of that before. And, I'm just sharing the things that I've experienced, but I thank the person who passed it on to me. For years I've read Mary Corbett's blog, and that's Mary Corbett with one T, by the way.
It is. Yes.
And thanks to Mary Corbett, I could say that you could look at the book reviews she has on her website, and I feel like I've purchased probably 75% of the books that she has shared. But, it's because of that I am someone that when I see something new, I'm interested and I'm intrigued, and I have, over the years, have followed through with it. And that because I haven't stayed in just one little needlework world. I really have gone in different directions. Someone had just recently mentioned to me that they were somewhere and they saw a bobbin lace demonstration and they thought it was fascinating, but she said, but I don't think I'm going to get into it. I'm much more of a mono hobbyist. And she's happy in her cross stitch world and wants to stay a mono hobbyist. And hey, I get that. I don't know if I could in any way call myself a mono hobbyist. And that's okay. We all have what works for us. And
Arlene, you aren't anywhere close to a mono hobbyist. No, not happening. Yeah. But it brings up a thing that was going through my mind the other day, because someone had mentioned about settling down and focusing on one aspect of stitching and getting good at it. And how important that was, because you get good at this, because otherwise you're never good at any of them. And I wondered if, because you can make that argument in sports and in a lot of things, jack of all trades, or you focus and get good. But I wondered if is needlework in general an exception to that kind of rule, in that the skills overlap so many ways. I was wondering, are you better off focusing on, say, cross stitch and getting really good at cross stitch, or are you just as well off if you try different techniques because of what they all teach you in terms of how to manipulate thread and how the thread interacts with the ground cloth and colors and the textures of the stitches? I couldn't help but wonder, in needlework, is it 6 of one, half a dozen of the other? Does it really matter? I don't know.
That's really fascinating. I mean, my gut reaction to that is that I really think it doesn't matter. I think that there's an element of, it's always about pushing a needle that's carrying thread through a hole. And what size hole, what fabric, canvas, whatever it's being pushed through, and what thread it is going to vary. And that's where personal preference is going to come into play. But the skills of getting your threads to lay nicely, the skill of, if it's following a chart and making sure that aspect, if it's about making sure you're actually getting in the hole and not sort of getting off kilter of the hole, like all those pieces, I really think that it can certainly be about trying all the different things, and you could get good at all of them by trying all of them. Like, I don't think you need to be a mono hobbyist in that kind of way, but that's very interesting to think about like that. I called this a transition piece. The piece I did that is, you could sort of say technically my first canvas work piece, but I actually didn't do it on canvas. I did it on Ada because I went into a store. I had this booklet of it's Wheels of Color by I think it's Ginny Moreau. But I had the booklet, the pattern, and it said 18 count canvas in it. And I went into a store that was primarily cross stitch, and they saw 18 count and they sold me a piece of Ada, and I didn't know the difference. So I started working on the Ada. And so, and it wasn't until a different time, a different store, a different location where another store owner commented, "Why are you doing this piece on Ada?" And I said, "Is that wrong?" And she was the one who taught me, well, it really should be worked on this stuff. But, hey, now that I see that you're doing it on Ada, it's coming out fine. And, that was sort of my introduction. I don't know if it's my introduction, but that was like an indication to me that it's okay to have these different, I don't want to say break the rules, because there aren't any rules that you're breaking, but sometimes when there's these, I hear it sometimes like in the needlepoint world, the canvas work world, that you should be working on this, that, or the other. No, you don't. You can give it a try. When I designed these two beginning canvas work pieces with some stitches, like some of the Hilton stitches, and I want to explain this because the first time I heard that phrase, I had no idea what somebody was talking about. So Jean Hilton was a canvas work designer, amazing, like the things she created. And so she created so many different stitches that category of stitches just gets referred to as the Hilton stitches. But I had no idea what that was many years ago. So I had these various stitches in this canvas work piece, and somebody in a question said, could you actually do that on something like linen or Ada instead of canvas? It was a very good question. And because some of the stitches in this piece would be totally equivalent to doing specialty stitches on linen. And it's only some of the stitches where the thread is traveling a distance that if you were working on linen and Ada, I think they would get kind of, not loose, but like, I don't think they would stay as nicely. But the truth is, you could do it. You know,
Yeah.
it might give you a slightly different look, but you could do it. There's no needlework police out there. And sometimes there's some people that feel like there are needlework police. There aren't. You could do whatever you want. But the piece that I did unknowingly on Ada that should have been done on canvas, that is technically a canvas work piece, is my evidence that you don't need to follow the rules. And that's a piece that has a lot of traditional canvas work stitches. And, you know, it's 18 count. It's still, you know, the right number of strands of thread and so on, that nothing looks really wrong. And I don't even know if you could, because it's completely covered, I don't even know if you could really tell, except that I'm saying it right now, that it's on Ada and not on canvas. But it's a good, you know, it's a good story in my mind of how you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, but isn't that one of the things, at least in my mind, that I think holds back a lot of people who want to explore stitching, is that needlework police thing, where no matter how they do it, there's somebody there with a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge to tell them that in no uncertain terms, that's wrong. You have to do it this way. Yet it worked. They were able to stitch it. You know, they might be left-handed, you know, and it worked for them, and it got the same result. And so you kind of cower in a corner because the experienced person told you were wrong, but your mind says, well, I don't know what's wrong with what I did. You know, how can that be? I mean, other than carrying threads across open canvas, which, you know, anybody quickly learns that you probably don't want to do that. But a lot of it, you know, I wonder if that doesn't hold people back and maybe even chase some people out, in that they feel like every time I turn around, somebody's telling me it's wrong, and that there should be more encouragement and let them evolve. And eventually, you know, some things that people might do wrong, and that's wrong in quotes, you know, they may find later on that doing it the more accepted way really does work better. But if they discover it along the way through their own stitching, then they're just that much more knowledgeable anyway, because now they've learned a couple of options. But I just wonder if, you know, we talk about the hobby in general is getting older and not enough young kids, but I also think there's that other factor where we hurt the hobby by, you know, this police type scolding, if you will. And I don't see a lot of it, but I know it happens, and you just wonder where that's at. And it isn't just needlepoint. Like when I was learning photography, you would get that a lot from photographers. You know, these are the rules. Stick to the rules. Yet, when you would look around at photography as an art form, there's no rules for it either. You know, it's creating an image that captivates someone's eyes. It captures and makes them stop and explore it. That's all that matters ultimately. And it doesn't matter really how you get there. It's what the end result is. You know, does it work? Does it really captivate someone? And so it's not just needlework, but I think that hurts photography too. I mean, it's one of the reasons I never joined a photography club, because I tried a couple of them, and they would have these exhibitions at the end, you know, where everybody brought in their picture and they'd get judged, and it was just there was very little positive about it. It was just tear everything apart until the one guy who won all the time gets the badge for the night and goes home. And that's not fun. You know, that just sucks the fun right out of it. And so it happens. It's human nature, but it also, I think, hurts hobbies, probably hurts, I would say, art hobbies more than anything. You know, no, that's the wrong way, or, you know, don't hold your brush like that, hold it like this. Well, I'm still putting paint on a canvas. Who cares, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that happens in my lace world. You know, on one side we joke about there's no lace police, and on the other hand, when I've taken classes, it sometimes feel like the lace police have come out to play. There's sometimes where you read something that, or some pattern or some instructions that feel so nitpicky and so specific, and it is like, why? I've been doing some reading, sort of delving a little bit into the art world, and using that word in a very big, generic kind of way. And sometimes you get into these books that are very much like in the painterly art world, and those are not what interest me. And again, thanks to you guys, and I'm pretty sure it was Tess and Thorne who talked about the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and that's a great book. And when I got that from my library, there was another one called Steal Like an Artist. There's something like that. Steal Like an Artist. That again, not pigeonholing to artists like paint and brush artists, but the kinds of mentality that those who work with needle and thread are artists. And it doesn't matter if you're just following a pattern. And, I've had this discussion in like small stitching groups and so on. And it's an interesting thing. People say, I just follow a pattern. This isn't art. And I get that. But then, you make the connection with someone who plays a piece of classical music and they haven't written the music,
right?
But how they are playing the music, they are an artist. And so how you are putting your needle and thread into that fabric, you are in some ways, and especially if you're making your own choices, if you've changed a color or if you're including or not including some portion of a pattern, or especially if you're adding to whatever the original designer did, you are an artist. And I think that needs to be explored more and encouraged more. And, it killed me on one of Vanna's Flosstubes, not the recent amazing wins she's had this year at the fair, but it must have been last year's fair, or she might have even just been referring to a previous year where she's talking about, it was some ornaments or something small where she was like, and I got dinged by the judges because of the finishing that she used. She used some black ribbon or black finishing something, and the judge felt that it shouldn't have had black, and yet Vanna had a perfectly good reason why she used black for her finishing. And then this just stood out to me in this little segment, because Vanna then went on to say something about how it should have been focused on the stitching and so on. But in my mind, I'm just thinking, why is that important at all? Why, I mean, I have entered a lot of pieces in, judged competitions and, exhibits and so on. And there's a piece of me and I've got something in an exhibit right now, there is that element of competition and so on. And yet all the time I have to keep in mind, it is somebody's opinion, and they might be inexperienced in one form or another through years, through whatever, through training, and yet it's their opinion. And when Vanna wanted to put black ribbon or whatever it was on that particular piece for a specific reason, what was it for someone else to make a comment that was the quote wrong thing to do, or whatever the details of that was? That's where I just, I get sad when someone talks about, entering a fair and they didn't win anything, or they so on and so on. And it's just like, that should not be the be all end all, is somebody else's opinion or someone else's opinion about your piece. While it's helpful to get feedback, at the same time, sometimes the feedback itself can be, I'm just going to use this as a very clear-cut example, and maybe this will help somebody else out there. So I talked about the lace convention I was at, and I entered a piece. I've entered the last few years a piece into the lace competition, and they, it's not, you just get it whether you like it or not. They have 3 judges, and they handed me this year an envelope with the judges' forms. And this year the forms are even more detailed than they were in past years. Okay, fine, whatever. And it's very clear that judge number 2 was like the harsh critic of the group. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you got to realize, I mean, it's like I could show living proof of this. One judge made a comment that talked about how nicely balanced my piece was, and another judge said I needed to work on the balance of my piece. Like, I literally had in front of me two different people saying the opposite things.
Yeah.
There was my living proof that there's only so far you can put weight on other people's commentary on your work, and instead focus on what matters the most to you. That's what I just have learned over the years when it comes to that, and the support that goes on. You know, when you hear people in their stitching groups or at their local shops, and they just support one another in a positive way, and not hear about being told that's the wrong way to do it. That's just,
right.
I hate that.
Yeah, well, that was, what stuck with me recently was when I talked about it in a midweek show when I was in at Sign of the Arrow in St. Louis, and there was a lady sitting there stitching by herself in the middle of the afternoon on a painted canvas. And I walked up and, what are we stitching here? And the first words out of her mouth was, well, it isn't very good. It's only my second canvas. And my reaction to that, oh, that's sad. It really is tragic that she feels almost embarrassed because it's her second canvas that isn't very good. Yeah, you could find some flaws there, but quite frankly, I thought it looked pretty decent, and she was having fun doing it and having an enjoyable time sitting in a store full of threads and canvases, stitching on her piece with people who can help her with the next stitch. And I thought, well, who cares if it's your second one or you think it's good or not? Just enjoy that, and it comes out. And then if you think next time that you might have done something better, then do it better on the next one. But enjoy that. But it was just this kind of this little black cloud over her head that while she was doing something she clearly enjoyed, it wasn't measuring up. So it's just tragic. You should be able to. That's why I've so enjoyed Christine and her approach to the Debbie Rowley pieces. Just dig in. If I make mistakes or it's a mess, so what? Look what I learned, and look at the experience I gained, and then I'll apply that to the next one. And for me, it's just been really refreshing because it's just I don't care how complicated it is. I don't care what the end result is. I'm going to do my best, having never done this. And we'll see how it comes out. And I don't know. There's lots of disappointing things about this hobby, but it's just the overriding thing is to just do it and enjoy it. And when you're done, you have something to show people. And if you don't like it, you can always redo it or do it better on the next one. But geez, enjoy it, for crying out loud.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. All right, Arlene. Now see, we got to stop because we're getting into Arlene Flosstube time zone here. Yes, we're at an hour and 10 minutes or so, and an hour 30 is typical Arlene Flosstube. So
I only had a couple that went that long. Well. What I said on my recent one, which was inspired by something that somebody else said, is that it's about certainly getting more comfortable doing it, but it is about when you feel like you're part of a community and you're just sharing more. And that's what has started to happen. When the first time you connected with me on Facebook and said, and this was very early on when you first started doing the Fiber Talk, said, hey, you want to be a guest? And my response to you was, all right, I'm flattered, but I'm just a stitcher. You're getting designers on this thing. What could I possibly say? And I just feel now like I've been a part of a community. And I also just so appreciate that you guys talk about me on Fiber Talk, which just to no end. But just that it's an extension of the community, and that is real out there. And I'm just going to make this plug for anyone who's listening, and it certainly doesn't have to be Flosstube. Whatever I spent so many years, I continue, I'm very much a solitary stitcher. I occasionally have had times that I get the opportunity to go to the needlework store, for some stitching time. But for the most part, most of my stitching life has been working on my own, and that's the way I like it. But there are ways online to find a community, and it has made a difference in my last 6 months or so. And I think that, whether it's through Fiber Talk, through social media outlets, through other venues, there are people out there. At my last video, I said this, and it has been on my mind all week, that I was relaying a story that a friend of mine said, and it was related to a lace thing, but it's bigger than that. I was with some friends, we were on a tour, and the day of the tour, we were going up to this lace convention, and the group I was with was a lot of needlework enthusiasts, and everyone had the day of the tour that they were really excited about, and everyone knew that this lace day was like my day. And I couldn't, I needed to do my shopping and the vendors and the exhibits, and I just needed to appreciate it on my own. And I go to turn to my little groupies, the ones that I would have spent the day with, and basically saying, I need to do this day on my own. And my friend says, Arlene, we get it. We are your friends, but these are your people. Go have a good day. And we all need to find our people out there. And some people are very lucky that they have their people in live stitching groups or guilds or what have you. And I think everyone needs to just find their people. And I'm just an example of someone who feels like I have found my people in an online kind of way over the last few months. So I just put that out there for others to think about and to work on finding their people, because we are out here. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. That's it. Yes, agreed. Got to find your people, no doubt. That's it, though. We got to end this thing.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Arlene, for joining us. Thanks to everybody for listening and spreading the word about Fiber Talk. And Arlene and Etsy, WorksByABC, and Flosstube. Just look for Arlene on YouTube. You'll find her. And see those. They're some of my favorite Flosstube videos. And that's it. We'll be back Wednesday, hopefully with Christine. And thanks for listening.